Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Car Show and Tell. I'm your host, Tim the Toolman, and we're back with the exciting conclusion of our C4 Corvette's rear big brake upgrade on a budget. So, where do I begin? This project it's been difficult. But I'm done. The final assembly, or the final combination of parts that I settled on, has been on the car for probably about a month now. And in regular driving and some road test usage, it looks like it's been a really good solution so far. The brakes aren't very noisy, and they seem to function perfectly fine. I get good action out of the brake pedal. And after conducting some spirited driving on some of the back roads around where I live, and jumping out and doing some quick measuring of temperature, I'm pretty pleased with the results. So far, when I've been able to jump out and use my IR thermometer and shoot the rear rotor temperature and the front rotor temperature, I've come up with temps that have been no more than 5 degrees different. So the rear rotors and the front rotors are keeping pace with one another, I believe. It looks like the rears are, in all my tests, have been only 1 to 5 degree less in temperature, degrees Fahrenheit, than the fronts. So, if the fronts have been 152, the rears have been, 151 or whatever, 147, somewhere in that range. It's just a made-up example. But it leads me to believe that those rear brakes are putting in the work. I haven't had any issues with the rear end locking up like it did before, but then again, that was on autocross and track courses, so I have been able to engage the front anti-lock, but it doesn't feel like the rear has activated, if that makes any sense, if you think you can tell. Or maybe I can't tell one or the other. But if I were to take a guess, I'd say it's the fronts that are vibrating the brake pedal. Anyway, let's get back to this. So, I got a book here. This is a book that's written by Len Terry and Alan Baker. I've had this book for a while. Racing Car Design and Development. If you know anything about Len Terry and his Terrier race cars, or the work that he's done for Dan Gurney, Graham Chapman of Lotus, the man's designed a lot of racing cars in his lifetime. And I've read through this book a while ago, and I've come back to it pretty often to reread and reference different sections of the book for projects that I've got going on. But one of the big takeaways from that book, one of the big things that I took away from that book is he makes it a point to say that a lot of times the best car on the circuit isn't necessarily the car that was penned by the best designer, or designed by the best engineer, or the best engineered car. But he says the car was built and engineered by the guy who made the best compromises. So keeping that in mind, originally, when I had planned out what I wanted for this rear brake kit, or upgrade, or whatever you want to call it, I was looking for calipers that checked a few different boxes, right? they needed to be compact and lightweight, right? The rotors had to be larger in diameter and thicker in cross section. And they had to have good availability for pads and hoses and stuff like that, right? So I didn't want to be using anything exotic. I'm not purchasing Lamborghini parts to swap onto the back of a Corvette and calling this a budget project. Right? So I had to stick to the realm of, you know, passenger car stuff. But we all know that there's some great passenger cars out in the market, right? They have excellent capabilities. I remember the first time I got smoked by an Audi, and I felt it. You know, it stung. It was a little hard to believe, because I was in a hopped-up Mustang at the time, and I thought I was king of the hill, and I got smoked by a four-door with tinted windows. Anywho, I had kind of already settled on the newer Corvette calipers when I started this project because of their lightness, their lightweight, and their ease of availability. But I had to eventually scratch that idea. And I was trying to get those Corvette calipers to fit Audi brackets, which in hindsight wasn't the smartest idea. And it just didn't work out. The Corvette calipers are just designed to be mounted on a different caliper bracket than the Audi calipers. They sit up too high on the Audi caliper bracket, and they only sat about 3/4 of the way over the pistons in the caliper, the piston in the caliper. And I wasn't happy with that. I didn't want to wear the pads funny, and I just thought it would cause problems. Well, and it did. The other problem that it caused, the fact that it sat so high up on the bracket, meant that rear wheel just, it was a touch too much inside of that rear wheel barrel. It was much too close. And, you know, rocks, sticks, anything get in between there. The chances of it jamming between the caliper and the inside barrel of the wheel is pretty high. The clearance was just minimal, negligible clearance. So the Audi calipers just had to be the way to go. Even though they're heavier, it's a denser, heavier caliper, maybe on the order of 5 pounds versus the Corvette's pound or pound and a half. But that's a weight gain that I'm willing to give up because it just works out on the Audi bracket so much better. So that's what I had to do. So there's still a few modifications that had to be made in order for that to work. But all in all, I think it's working well. And I don't notice the extra weight. So, hey. All right. So now that that's all said and done, I do have a list of parts and part numbers that I used for this swap. And I'm going to include this in the description of the video if you want to replicate this setup for your own usage. But I do have a handy sign that I made for all of you out of garbage and a Sharpie. Just outlining the parts that I used and the total cost involved that I had to pay for everything. If you've watched any of the earlier videos, you've seen the 05 BMW X3 front rotors that I chose and had to modify slightly I had to take an 050 cut off the inside of the ID of the e-brake drum, or the ID of the rotor hat, to make it an e-brake drum to work with the factory e-brake in the Corvette, and it does wonderfully. The hub centric rings that I used to get those rotors to fit the Corvette hubs. The brackets were 05 to 07 Audi A6 or S6, and it looks like the 07 and 11, 07 to 11, so it might be 05 to 11 that are all the same. I got two differing reports when I researched all this. The calipers wound up using the 7 to 11 Audi S6 calipers that came with the brackets. The pads were 07 Audi S6. I went with dynamic friction track pads, and then the hoses, I wound up having to use rear brake hoses that fit from the StopTech website, 04 Audi RS6 and 0708 RS4s. And this so far has been the total cost involved. So that combination of parts that I bought down at the bottom here is a total that it ran me $582.68. I didn't count brake fluid or rotor paint or miscellaneous washers and rivets or whatever. So the big parts, $582.68, and that'll get you some 12 3/4 inch brakes for the back of your early C4 that has the drum and disc parking brake assembly. So I don't think that that's a bad investment. And you don't always have to spend as much either. You could go with standard non-drilled and slotted rotors and save yourself some money there. Save yourself some money using, just regular brake hoses, not the stainless steel braided ones, regular brake pads. So this kind of a swap might run you even less money than it did me. So now that we're done with that, what I'm going to do is stop the video. I'm going to go out and I'm going to disassemble the left side of that brake setup, and then I'm going to run through the install of that all on camera so you guys can see how it all goes together if you feel like you want to grab that stuff and try it out for yourself. Like I said, the rotor and the caliper bracket needed to be modified before they would fit the car, and I won't be able to go over that on this video. I can tell you about it, but there's better, more detailed explanations of those modifications in earlier videos when I was still trying to fetter out all of this swap. So that's about it for now. I'll see you outside in a moment. Okay, folks, here we are. We're back out at the car. Everything's disassembled as far as the old brakes being off, right? So this is our starting point for this new set of brakes here. And we're gonna start off with our rotor. Okay, this is the BMW front rotor from the X3 that we've cut, right? We had to cut a little bit away from here back to where the vents begin, and then we took an 050 cut in here, right, to give ourselves a proper diameter e-brake drum. Okay, let me pick this up. We got our 050 cut in here. We cut that off right here. Hopefully you can see that in the camera. Then the other thing that we had to do was just run a cylinder hone in this side, just a touch, till we could get this hub centric ring to fit. And what I want to do, take a little bit of anti-seize, just a touch. Okay, and go in the center of this, right? Slide this thing on here, try to keep it from getting stuck to the hub, because you never know, we might have to take that off at some point later on down the road, and that won't be very fun if it's galvanically corroded to the steel hub, being that that's an aluminum ring. Now that I've covered myself in anti-seize, wipe that off, screw that back on. Am I speaking loud enough? Can everybody hear me? I don't know. Alright, anywho, we're going to slide on our BMW rotor. And just right back that off. But maybe back that off a click. Okay. I had adjusted this before when I put it together the first time. Basically install this rotor until I feel a little bit of drag on the e-brake shoes, and then back it off 3 clicks. But steel feels like there's a little bit of drag, so back it off another click. I like a tight e-brake when it does its job well. Definitely going the wrong way. That's better. Right on, right off. This is where it was before. Yeah, just a little drag. Okay. All right. I'm satisfied with that. So we've got our 12 3/4 inch BMW rotor on. Now we need our modified Audi bracket right there. If you go back and watch some of the older videos about this brake swap, you'll see how I got from this to that. Essentially, took this surface and machined it much further up. Okay, stopped about there, right? And then cut a bunch of this off here and re-drilled my holes here and here. And we got this, right? So if you want to know how to do that, I guess go back, watch the old video, which, you know, I'll show you the template I came up with and how I marked out the new holes and all that baloney. So we're going to mount this bracket up, and we're going to use the same bolts that came out of the stock. I drilled and tapped new holes here, but I used the same thread pitch and diameter as the original bolts. The bolts for the original Corvette rear caliper. Those 2 larger bolts right there. Okay. So, set you back down here. Come on, tripod. And we'll bolt this back up. And I have my shims beeswaxed on the back here. Okay, basically I keep some 0.005, 010, 015 washer shims around. Okay, and as you're fitting this up, you want it centered up on your rotor, front to back, right? So you take a feeler gauge in between here, on both sides of the rotor, on the front and the back, in between the rotor and the bracket, top and bottom. Use your feeler gauge, right? Split the difference with the thickness of your shim, and you will be close to having this bracket perfectly centered. It might be a couple thousandths off one way or the other, but that's good enough. Just as long as the rotor's not riding, or the bracket's not riding on the rotor per se. You understand? Making squealing noises or anything. And these bolts tend to take a little bit of time to work back in, especially the one that goes behind this e-brake cable bracket. I don't know if you can see that. You have your e-brake cable bracket here. You've got to set that in place and then run your bolt through from the back side, through the e-brake cable bracket, through the rear upright, and into your brake caliper bracket. And you gotta make sure your shim hasn't fallen out, which mine hasn't. The beeswax trick is working. And you can only really get to this bottom bolt with a combo wrench. It's a pain in the ass. So I'm gonna pause the video while I tighten those bolts up, and we'll pick up again from there. Okay, I forgot a step. First, put a spacer or in a lug nut, or just, you know, a regular, some way to tighten this rotor down to the hat, perfectly vertical, right? I'm sorry, to the hub. Tighten the rotor down to the hub so that it sits in here perfectly vertically, right? Because if you go putting this on without having this vertical, you can't, and it's got to be on here nice and tight on the hub. If it's not, you're gonna have a hell of a time trying to measure for your spacers to fit your bracket on, right? This has got to be mounted solid, then you can mount this solidly, you know, equally centered front to back on your rotor. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense? I'm out of breath. Anyway, I put this bracket on. I thought my spacers were wrong and didn't realize I hadn't tightened this down. So, okay, now that we're done with that, we've got our Audi caliper bracket on here. We're going to mount our Audi caliper. What was this from? An S6? Yes, an S6. And it has, well, let me get, there's yet another reason that I was hesitant to use these Audi calipers, right? And that is also because they come with this chunky e-brake motor, right? That activates the cylinder, the piston in this caliper has an e-brake Archimedes screw in the center of it. Anywho, this chunky e-brake motor is what activates that e-brake, right? And I had to figure out a way to get rid of this and cover up the back side of the caliper, because I didn't want any moisture, road salt, whatever, getting in around the back side of that mechanism. So I had to figure out how to eliminate this. So I'll show you what I did, and I'll cut away to a little better demonstration about this cap on the rear, how I came up with this and how I sealed it. Okay, Here's the cap that I made to go on the back side of the caliper to cover where the old e-brake motor went. And you can see it's just a freeze plug, a 2 9/64 diameter freeze plug with a couple of 1/4 inch fender washers that were ground, you know, to fit adjacent to this freeze plug, and just welded on here and here and on the back side. And I cleaned up the welds and ground them down, and it's just going to get some paint to match the caliper. Here's our caliper, and here's the back side where the old e-brake motor went. And this cap will just fit right on like so. Okay, I'll just put a little bit of silicone lubricant right here, whoops, around the O-ring, just to give it a little bit of help. And then a couple of 6mm by 1 centimeter bolts will hold it in place. That's that. Okay, so made this cap, welded some ears to it, and then it's the perfect size. It just fits right over the back of the caliper where the e-brake motor used to go, and you bolt it on with a little bit of sealant. And here you can see how the bottom side of our brake hose mounts into our caliper. That's why I chose these brake hoses to do that job. Get this back out through here. Come on. Now the other way. Full. There we are. Okay, so we just need our caliper bolts here. Oh, another thing about this caliper. It has this raised ridge right here. Okay, the S6 ones had this raised ridge. I've seen other calipers, Audi calipers, that look very, very close to this design, and the ridges kind of go at an angle or something on this side. I can't remember, but that raised area had to be ground flat. So I'll cut to a little video of that here, and then we'll come back. So now, here's the spot on the caliper that you want to grind. That's where it was. It was just a protrusion that sticks up maybe about 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch. Just grind it down till it's nice and level with the area around it. And we're back. Now we're going to get our bolt and bolt this up here. My neighbor's laughing at me because I'm down here in my driveway talking to myself. And I'm going to talk about bleeding these for a second. So actually I need something to demonstrate here. Alright, here's a block of wood that I cut, and then I just simply crammed it in here, and there's that. You have to depress your piston a little bit, but cram this block in here, and when you're bleeding the brakes, you have to keep the caliper oriented this way, because in the Audi application, that's how it was mounted, up here on the rotor, right? In the Corvette, we're moving it down here. And what that means is this bleeder screw is at the wrong angle to be bled, to have all the air bled out. Okay, leave those there, right? So this bleeder screw, when you're bleeding these rear brakes, when you're going to bleed these, you got to keep this bleeder screw pointed basically straight up. So cram a block of wood in there that'll prop it up, and it'll keep the piston from coming out, right? And it has to be wider that block has to be wider than the width of the 2 pads that are going to go in there, because when you're done, you've got to pry that block of wood out, and then you slide this thing over your pads and bolt it down. Okay, so that's one oddball, one more, you know, cautionary step to getting this swap to work, is making sure that you're bleeding all the air out of these rears in the orientation that, you know, that it needs to be. If you try to do it like this, it's just going to trap air in the top of the cylinders. So it's got to be bled like that, and then you finish your installation. This was already bled. I didn't remove the hoses or anything, so it will be fine for me to just continue going like this. Put these back in here. All right. Speaking of pads, okay, we got our dynamic friction pads. These were the track rated pads, double G rated. Let's talked about brake pad ratings in an earlier video, and what the the letters mean. Yeah, the numbers and the letters. There's some numbers too. Every pad in the US has to be sold with a information on it. And it goes into, you know, we went into talking about chase tests and a bit about how that works. So, okay, using the factory pins and rubbers that came with these brackets. I'm in the way, aren't I? Factory pins and rubbers that came with these brackets, and the factory bolts here. And we're just going to tighten these 2 bolts up. Be quiet, Sasha. I'm making a video. Let's see. What size is that? Rats. I'll be right back. Okay. So last thing I want to talk about here is our brake hose. Okay. Part numbers in the description, but that is a StopTech stainless steel braided brake hose for a couple of different Audi fitments. Like I said, I liked it because of the 90-degree end there that fits very nicely into our caliper down here and avoids, you know, making contact with the rest of this spindle. And the reason I had to use this is because the end of this doesn't take a regular banjo bolt. It uses like the European bubble flare type fitting joint. Okay, so I don't think, you know, I could have maybe machined and spot faced that, and maybe the threads are the same for, you know, a type of banjo bolt, but why go to the extent of that effort when I can just find, like I said, a hose that I'm sure had a bent 90-degree end, and eventually I found one, and it fits right in here. So no need to do any additional work there. And there's room right here that, you know, it doesn't get into contact with our rear upright. And I routed it up between these radius rods, and then just made a quick and dirty bracket, really, with a couple of insulated P-clamps, I think a 3/16 rivet, and a number 8 washer on the back side of it, right? Put your 2 P-clamps together like this, put your washer through the holes in them, put your rivet through the holes in them, put your washer, your number 8 washer, over the back side of it, and then proceed to close your rivet, right? that pops both of those P-clamps together. It's somewhat flexible, and it holds that brake hose far enough away from these rear radius rods that they're not going to make any contact with it, and that brake hose isn't going to by chance rub through. Okay, that was my largest concern, is I don't want this thing to wear through at any point and begin leaking and I lose my brakes. So that's my quick and dirty. Just covered it with some of that corrugated wiring plastic. It gets a bit close to the frame rail up here, but I think in the course of it undulating up and down, going down the road, it'll be okay. Time will tell. Maybe I'll have to put, you know, something else here to give it something to space it away from that frame rail, but for right now I'm going to see how this works and I'll keep an eye on it. The bad part about this end is that it doesn't have the slot for the factory brake line clip. It does fit the factory brake line perfectly. It's that same bubble flare. Okay, so no difference there. You just screw these two ends right together. And this was some other brake line clip that I had laying around in my junk. I have no idea what it's from, but it worked. It slid over here and it's holding the brake line firmly in place, the brake hose firmly in place. So I'm gonna run with that. You might be able to find something if you want to try to do the same thing. You might recognize that kind of brake line clip too, and you might say, ah, I know what that's from. I'll just, you know, I got a couple of those, or they're in my junk, or I know where to get them. So there we have it. That's it for as far as the installation of the brake line goes, and that's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle in a nutshell for putting larger brakes on the back of an 84 to 87 C4. 88 and up guys, you got other options. You got better options that don't necessarily fit these earlier cars. So, you know, left up to my own devices, this is the best I could do. Alright, maybe not the best, but, you know, I don't think it's too bad. Tell me what you think. Leave me a note in the comments. Let me know if you think this is a good idea or if it's absolute crap. Like I said, when I've tested it so far, it seems like they're working pretty good. So I have no complaints there. We'll see what happens when autocross season resumes later on this month. You know, the wear pattern on the rotor doesn't seem too bad. I mean, it doesn't utilize the entire rotor, but 80% of that, well, maybe a little more, 85% of that width of the rotor swept area. So I like the way the pattern looks. It's okay by me, and it fits the stock rear tires barely. So let's come over here. I got a stock wheel, and I'll let you know how we had to make this fit. It's a bit like, if you remember the front brakes that I did, the front brake kit that I made fit behind the stock wheels and tires. Let me move this thing, and I'm going to talk about it. Actually, whoop, the weights are gone. They might have hit it, or they might have just fallen out. Oh no, this is the front wheel. Sorry, this isn't the rear wheel. This is the front wheel. But either way, what I wanted to tell you was, before this rear kit, okay, just like the front kit, when I put the fronts in, I had to take the weights out of this area and I had to move them up into here to get those stick-on wheel weights to clear the calipers. The rear is the same, okay? I tried going around and I had the weights stuck to here. And I could hear it. I could hear it every time the wheel went around. Crack, 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 crack. And I said, oh, I gotta move the weights. And they were clipping right here, right along this caliper. You might be able to see a faint line where I painted over that. But it did wear a faint line where just the edge of those weights was cracking off the caliper every time it went around. So, much like the front, I had to take the wheel weights for the rear, strip them off here, clean the tape and residue, and I had to move them further in here to this part of the wheel, and they clear. It works fine. So that's that. And the clearance between this caliper and the inside of that wheel, I would say, is probably past that 1/8 of an inch grace area that I like to see. It's probably closer to about 3/16 of an inch total space between the caliper and that wheel, which is 3/16 more than the Corvette calipers gave me. And they fit better, and they work like they're intended to. So, compromise. Who knows? Maybe Len Terry is looking down from Gearhead Heaven right now, and he's like, huh, somebody did read that book and take notes. Who knows? So there you have it, fellas. Yeah, that's about it for now. We're going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for watching. Stay tuned. We got more coming. I got some other videos I want to let you guys in on. Some stuff that we got for the car. And maybe some other projects coming up here if I ever finish renovating my house. Who knows? Time, man. Never have enough of it. Alright, fellas, ladies, everybody. I'm Tim the Tool Man. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.